Back tonight here on In Focus. Let's get back to our top story this evening, which is, of course, the statements made today by International Relations Minister Dr. Naledi Pandor, calling on the United Nations to urgently lead a peace process to end the Israel-Hamas war. She told the National Council of Provinces that Palestinians have faced violence for decades. Political analyst and human rights activist Ayesha Kajee joining us now for more on that. Ayesha, good to have you, and thank you very much for your time. The South African government doing what would be called, I suppose, a doubling down on its stance, or upping the ante, so to speak, in terms of the position that they're calling. Coming short, in fact, even going as far as saying the ICC should have arrested Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for the killing of women, children, and the elderly. How is this going to play out in terms of relations between South Africa and Israel, Pretoria and Tel Aviv?
Well, from a human rights viewpoint, I think the South African government has made the correct call. In fact, it's been a long time coming. It's, a month down the line from the October 7th attack by Hamas on a kibbutz in Israel. And then, of course, the retaliation, the very fierce retaliation of Israel in Gaza, which is amounting not just to war crimes or collective punishment, which are both punishable under international law. Israel is culpable there. But many organizations, including Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, etc., are saying that war crimes have indeed been committed, but there is now a very strong possibility that genocide is happening in Gaza.
The call now is
given the severity of that, regardless of trade ties between the two countries, regardless of the fact that South Africa has a huge Jewish diaspora in Africa, etc., it's no longer about ethnicity. It's about human rights. It's about the violation on a macro level by a state, by an occupying state, against those who are under occupation.
President Biden saying that there is no going back to the status quo before October 7, meaning that whatever happens after this particular round of attacks, there is a view that there must be something else that comes next. South Africa saying that their view is a two-state solution which creates a Palestinian state along the lines of the 1967 resolution that was taken and the multiple other resolutions that followed in the United Nations. Do you think Israel is open to that two-state solution?
Well, it's been obvious since then that Israel is not open to it because of the increase in illegal settlements, illegal under international law, illegal as described by the International Court of Justice. So given the expansion of settlements and given that much of that Palestinian land designated for a Palestine under the 1967 borders is now currently under occupation by Israel, is subject to apartheid-type separation walls, differences, different roads, different water systems, different education systems, etc. It's essentially a state of apartheid. I've been there in the West Bank recently. I've been in Palestine earlier this year. And I can tell you that what is going on there, and this is the West Bank, let alone Gaza, is really a state of apartheid. Former U.S. President Jimmy Carter has said so. Former Archbishop Desmond Tutu has said so. Many, many people, Jews, Christians, Muslims, agnostics, atheists, Hindus, of all faiths, of all ethnicities have said this, that there is apartheid in Israel. And over and above that, Gaza has been the world's largest open-air prison for over 25 years. And it is now in danger of becoming, as Amnesty International Secretary General has said, it's now in danger of becoming the world's largest graveyard. That is a serious, serious situation.
The situation, of course, has got international implications, and we are almost seeing undertones and even in some reporting that it could possibly even result in some trade relations being reviewed, one of them being a goer for South Africa. Do you think that the U.S. pressure might change the stance of South Africa at this point?
I think the U.S. pressure is unlikely to change the stance of South Africa. I think that South Africa, coming from a history of apartheid itself, should question whether the advantages of those trade ties are so important to the country's economy as to allow it to turn a blind eye to, as I said, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide. So that is the balancing act that South Africa has to do from an international relations perspective. AGOA has been very important to the South African economy. It offers favorable terms for South African exports of various products. On the other hand, the United States is now arming what is potentially, if not a genocide machine, certainly a war crime state.
Yeah.
And the United States itself should be questioning its own integrity and ethics, given its outcry on issues such as the Ukraine and its relative silence on issues such as the 10,000 deaths and the cause of 30 days, 1 month in Gaza, 1/3 of which are children. How are children liable as terrorists, as so-called terrorists? How does Israel justify murdering 3,000 children in the last 30 days?
Now, of course, this would, in a sense, represent new relations between America and Sub-Saharan Africa. Niger being kicked out, for example, of that AGOA agreement. Burkina Faso being kicked out of that AGOA agreement. Now, possibly South Africa standing to be reviewed by the United States in their continued, I suppose, involvement in that agreement. Is this likely going to now introduce the dynamic of China coming in, certainly to play a role?
Certainly, given that South Africa is a member of the BRICS coalition, China is becoming an increasingly important trading partner for South Africa and for other African countries on the continent. So too are other members of that coalition. And on the other side of that coin, of course, is that South Africa needs to also keep an eye on and a very firm finger on the pulse of China's economic trajectory and where that economic trajectory meets its human rights record, because that is certainly something that is should be coming into question when South Africa looks at its trade ties with China. So, if we say we're a country whose international relations, whose foreign relations, and we've been saying this since the Madiba era, if we're saying our foreign relations are built on the principle of human rights, then that principle needs to be applied consistently. Of course, in the case of, as I said, the United States, it's obviously not applied consistently, given its differing positions on issues such as Ukraine and what is currently happening in Gaza. But at the same time, South Africa was very vocal and very much an instrumental partner when there was the issue of war crimes and, again, potential genocide in Darfur. And South Africa was instrumental in the secession of South Sudan from the Republic of Sudan, and in calling for an investigation into those war crimes in Sudan. So South Africa has been vocal on the continent and outside the continent on issues of human rights. Yeah. But it should not allow itself to be subjected to pressure by what used to be the only superpower in the world. There are now other emerging powers. And while we must hold those other emerging powers to the same human rights standards, it does mean that we have options with regard to trading partners.
The IFP views the actions of South Africa to recall its envoy in Tel Aviv as isolationism, while the economic freedom fighters would see it as not enough. Do you think South Africa should go all the way to the point of expelling the Israel ambassador to South Africa?
Well, the South African International Relations Minister Pandor has said that the recall of South African diplomats is so that those diplomats who have been on the ground in Palestine are able to give the department a thorough briefing on what they have witnessed, what they have heard, the information and data they've collected. And I think it's likely that anybody who's collected data from within Palestine is going to come to that conclusion, as Amnesty International has, as Human Rights Watch has, that at the very least, war crimes have been committed, and there's a possible genocide that is being committed. We've had, op-eds in previously pro-Israel media in the United States, in Britain, in other parts of Europe, all actually questioning now, is genocide happening in Gaza? And many people, the reports coming out seem to indicate that it is. It's also questionable, why is Israel not allowing certain Brazilian and Irish workers, citizens, to come out of Gaza through the Rafah crossing? They've been kept inside of Gaza. It is because they probably have eyewitness accounts of genocide in Gaza. I mean, hospitals being bombed, refugee camps being bombed, schools being bombed, entire families, 3-4 generations of families being exterminated. There is no other word for it. This is ethnic cleansing happening.
It's a difficult question.
So we have to really balance our human rights obligations on the one side with our economic interests on the other.
Yeah. I'm saying it's a difficult question to ask and to get an answer to, but what do you think would need to happen before even the question of a comprehensive ceasefire is put on the table? Because it was last raised in the UN, and Anthony Blinken outright rejected it, saying a ceasefire now would give Hamas impetus to commit another attack.
At the very least, we need a humanitarian corridor, and that is not happening. People who are seriously injured are unable to get out. There is food scarcity, water scarcity, power scarcity in Gaza. Disease is rampant. Israel is equating Gaza with Hamas, which is an unequal and unrealistic equation at the very least. They are collectively punishing the civilians of Gaza for an attack that was carried out by Hamas, which is an armed group that operates within Gaza. So really, there has been a lot of equivalency as to what is happening. And this has really been since the start of hostilities between the Israelis and the Palestinians, dating back to before 1948. But even since the establishment of the State of Israel, there's been an equivalency granted to Israel and Palestinians as though they operate from the same page. Israel is the world's 4th largest military power. Hamas has rockets, little rockets. Israel has nuclear weapons. There is no equivalence. So for Mr. Biden to actually say that a ceasefire will grant Hamas time to regroup or to rearm or to re-attack is actually quite facile, frankly.
Ayesha, appreciate your time. Let's leave it there for tonight. Ayesha Kajee, political analyst and a human rights activist there on the latest development.